The glass doors didn't just open, they detonated inward like a bomb had gone off. 7 feet of pure rage came through the shattered frame, blood streaked across a torn jacket, eyes burning with something far beyond human reason. Security guards rushed forward and were launched backward like rag dolls. A wheelchair flipped. IV stands crashed. Screams tore through the emergency room at Mercy Heights Medical Center in Clearwater Falls as the giant roared, a sound that came from somewhere deep and broken. And the entire hospital understood in that instant that someone was about to die tonight. Everyone ran, except one small, quiet nurse in scrubs 2 sizes too big, standing perfectly still near the supply closet. The rookie they'd already written off. The girl they'd humiliated just an hour ago. Lena Martinez didn't move. She watched. She calculated. And when the monster's eyes found hers, she did the one thing no one expected. She stepped forward. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, I need you to do something for me. Stick with this story all the way to the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The shift had started like every other shift in Lena Martinez's short career at Mercy Heights. Quiet, unremarkable, beneath notice. She'd clocked in at 6 p.m. sharp, tied her dark hair back in a tight bun, and stepped into the chaos of a Friday night emergency room with the kind of invisible presence that made supervisors forget she existed. That was fine with her. She preferred it that way. At 26 years old and barely 3 months into her nursing contract, Lena had already mastered the art of blending into backgrounds. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her movements efficient but unobtrusive. The other nurses barely spoke to her. The doctors didn't bother learning her name. She was just another face in scrubs, another pair of hands to restock supplies and run labs. Nothing more. "Martinez!" The bark came from across the nurses' station, sharp and impatient. Charge nurse Patricia Kilgore stood with her arms crossed, her expression carved from granite and permanent disapproval. Those crash carts were supposed to be restocked an hour ago. "What the hell have you been doing?" Lena looked up from the medication log she'd been double-checking. "I finished them at 7:30, ma'am. I documented, don't give me excuses. If I have to check your work one more time, you're going to find yourself reassigned to bedpans on the geriatric floor. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "And stop calling me ma'am. This isn't the military. You're in a hospital now. Act like it." Lena said nothing. She'd learned in her first week that talking back to Patricia Kilgore was like throwing gasoline on a fire. It only made things worse. So she nodded, kept her face neutral, and waited for the charge nurse to move on to her next target. But Patricia wasn't finished. "You know what your problem is, Martinez? You're too quiet, too passive. Nursing isn't about hiding in corners and checking boxes. It's about presence, authority, taking charge when things go sideways. Right now, you've got the backbone of a wet napkin." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "Between you and me, I don't think you're cut out for emergency medicine. Maybe you should think about switching to something less intense. School nursing, maybe? Occupational health?" The words landed like stones in Lena's chest, but her expression didn't change. "I'll take that under advisement." "You do that." Patricia turned and walked away, her shoes clicking against the linoleum with the confidence of someone who'd never once doubted her place in the world. Lena went back to her paperwork. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed even. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. Words were just noise. By 8 o'clock, the ER had filled to capacity. Friday nights always brought the worst of Clearwater Falls through those doors. Car accidents, bar fights, overdoses, falls, heart attacks, strokes, the endless parade of human fragility and bad decisions. Lena moved through it all like a ghost, restocking trauma rooms, running blood samples to the lab, assisting with intake when the unit clerks got overwhelmed. She kept her interactions brief, her eye contact minimal, her presence forgettable. Dr. Raymond Hess, the attending physician on duty, passed her in the hallway without acknowledgement. He'd been working at Mercy Heights for 15 years, and had developed the particular brand of arrogance that came from too much authority and too little oversight. When Lena tried to flag him down to report an irregular EKG on a chest pain patient, he waved her off without looking up from his phone. "Get one of the senior nurses to look at it," he said. I don't have time to hold rookies' hands tonight. Sir, the patient's presenting with... Did I stutter, nurse? He squinted at her ID badge. Martinez, you've been here what, 3 months? I've been practicing medicine since before you hit puberty. If there's something actually wrong, someone with experience will catch it. Now move along. You're blocking the hallway. Lena stepped aside. Dr. Hess walked past without another glance. She stood there for a moment, breathing slowly through her nose, then went to find senior nurse Diana Cho, who actually did look at the EKG and immediately called Dr. Hess back to order a cardiology consult. The patient was having a heart attack. They caught it in time. Dr. Hess never thanked her. He never even acknowledged she'd been right. By 9:30, Lena had retreated to the supply closet for a few minutes of silence. It wasn't hiding. She told herself it wasn't hiding. It was just strategic breathing space, a moment to reset before diving back into the controlled chaos outside. She sat on an overturned bucket between shelves of bandages and disinfectant, closed her eyes, and let the sounds of the ER fade to white noise. She didn't belong here. Not really. Everyone could sense it, even if they didn't know why. There was something off about her, something that didn't quite fit the mold of fresh nursing graduate stumbling through her first real job. The way she moved, too precise, too controlled. The way she assessed situations, too fast, too tactical. The way she sometimes went perfectly still when chaos erupted around her, like a predator deciding whether prey was worth the chase. But nobody looked close enough to see it. They just saw a small, quiet woman who kept her head down and did what she was told. Dead weight, soft, not cut out for emergency medicine. Fine, let them think that. The closet door opened without warning. Patricia Kilgore stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh fluorescent hallway lights, her expression somewhere between irritation and disgust. Are you seriously hiding in the supply closet? Lena stood smoothly, her face neutral, just doing a quick inventory check. Inventory check. Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. Right. Well, while you've been checking inventory, the rest of us have been drowning out there. Trauma 2 needs a full setup for a motorcycle accident coming in hot. Move. Yes, ma'am. Lena caught herself. Yes, Patricia. She slipped past the charge nurse and headed for Trauma 2, but Patricia's voice followed her down the hallway. You know what, Martinez? Maybe you should just stick to supplies for the rest of the night. Leave the actual nursing to people who can handle it. Lena didn't respond. She just kept walking, her footsteps silent on the linoleum, her hands steady at her sides. The words rolled off her like water off stone. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. She set up Trauma 2 in 4 minutes flat, crash cart positioned, monitors calibrated, intubation equipment laid out in perfect order, IV lines prepped and ready. When the motorcycle accident arrived, she assisted the trauma team with calm efficiency, anticipating needs before they were spoken, moving through the controlled chaos like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Which, in a way, she had. Just not in a hospital. The patient stabilized. The trauma team cleared out. Lena cleaned the room in silence, disposing of bloody gauze and used syringes, restocking what had been depleted. Dr. Hess walked past the open door, saw her working, and kept walking without comment. At 10:15, she was reassigned to triage. At 10:40, she was pulled to assist with a pediatric respiratory case. At 11, she was sent back to restock supplies because apparently the inventory she'd done earlier wasn't thorough enough. She did it all without complaint, without protest, without giving them any reason to look closer. By 11:30, the ER had hit a strange lull, that eerie calm that always came before the real storm of midnight madness. The waiting room was half empty. Most of the trauma bays were clear. The nurses gathered at the central station, comparing notes and swapping stories from earlier in the shift. Lena sat at the far end of the counter, documenting vitals in a patient chart, invisible as always. The other nurses' conversation washed over her. Did you see that motorcycle guy? Rode his bike straight into a median at 60 miles an hour and walked away with road rash and a broken collarbone. Unbelievable. Lucky bastard. We had a guy last week who tripped on his own shoelace and cracked his skull open. That's Darwin Award material right there. Laughter rippled through the group. Lena didn't join in. She just kept writing, her handwriting small and precise, every letter perfectly formed. Patricia Kilgore appeared at her shoulder without warning. You missed a decimal point on that last medication dosage. Lena glanced down at the chart. The dosage was correct. Patricia was just looking for reasons to criticize. I'll double-check it. You do that. Patricia's voice carried just loud enough for the other nurses to hear. Attention to detail, Martinez. In this job, mistakes kill people. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe it's time to consider a different career path. One of the other nurses, Sarah, maybe, or Jessica, Lena could never keep the names straight, spoke up. Give her a break, Pat. She's still learning. Learning? Patricia's eyebrows arched. She's been here 3 months. By now she should be pulling her weight, not dragging the rest of us down. She turned back to Lena, her voice dropping to something almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to help you understand that this environment might not be the right fit. There's no shame in admitting that. Emergency medicine isn't for everyone. Lena met her eyes for just a second, long enough to let Patricia see absolutely nothing, then look back down at the chart. Understood. Good. Patricia walked away, satisfied she'd made her point. The other nurses exchanged glances. A few looked sympathetic. Most just looked uncomfortable. Nobody said anything else. The conversation shifted to weekend plans and who was covering which shifts next week. Lena finished the chart, filed it properly, and excused herself to the bathroom. She walked down the empty hallway with measured steps, pushed through the door into the single-stall restroom, locked it behind her, and stood at the sink for exactly 60 seconds, staring at her own reflection in the mirror. Small, quiet, forgettable. Too soft for emergency medicine. The face staring back at her was young, unremarkable, carefully neutral. Dark eyes that revealed nothing. Hair pulled back in a practical bun. No jewelry, no makeup, nothing distinctive. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like. A fresh nursing graduate trying to find her footing in a high-pressure environment and failing. Perfect. She washed her hands, dried them carefully, and returned to the ER. At 11:55, the automatic doors at the ambulance bay slid open, and 2 paramedics wheeled in an elderly woman having a stroke. Lena helped transfer her to a gurney and assisted while Dr. Hess performed the initial assessment. The woman was stable, alert, responding to commands. They'd caught it early. She'd probably be fine. Good work, people, Dr. Hess announced to the room at large, already moving on to the next case. He didn't look at Lana. He never looked at Lana. She returned to the nurse's station and picked up another chart. The clock on the wall read 11:58 p.m. 2 more hours until her shift ended. Then she could go home to her anonymous apartment in a forgettable neighborhood, sleep for 6 hours, and do it all over again tomorrow. The ER doors were quiet. The waiting room was nearly empty. The trauma bays were clear. The calm before the storm. Lena felt it before she heard it, that subtle shift in air pressure, that infinitesimal change in the quality of silence that meant something was coming. Her hand paused mid-word on the chart. Her head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring like an animal scenting danger on the wind. The other nurses didn't notice. They were too busy talking, laughing, existing in the comfortable delusion that the lull would last. Lena's eyes tracked to the main entrance doors. Beyond the glass, the parking lot was dark and quiet. Empty. Nothing moving. But something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. That old instinct that had kept her alive when everything went to hell. That primal warning system that separated survivors from casualties. Her muscles tensed imperceptibly. Her breathing slowed, her focus narrowed. The clock ticked to midnight, and then the doors exploded. Not opened. Exploded. The reinforced glass shattered inward in a spray of glittering fragments as 7 feet of solid muscle and rage came through the frame like a battering ram. A man, if you could call him that, massive beyond reason, shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, arms thick as tree trunks, covered in blood and dirt, and something dark that might have been mud or might have been worse. His jacket was torn, hanging off one shoulder. His face was a mask of primal fury and absolute madness. He roared. The sound echoed through the ER like thunder, like something prehistoric, like the world ending. Security guard Mitchell Thompson, a former college linebacker who'd been working at Mercy Heights for 6 years, rushed forward with his hand on his pepper spray. "Sir, you need to calm..." The giant's fist caught him square in the chest. Thompson flew backward through the air, crashed into the waiting room chairs, and didn't get up. Security guard Annie Reeves went for her radio. The giant's other hand shot out and grabbed her by the uniform shirt, lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing, and threw her into the wall. She hit hard and crumpled. Screaming started. Patients in the waiting room scattered. A wheelchair overturned. An elderly man trying to get out of the way fell and couldn't get back up. A woman grabbed her child and ran for the exit. The giant grabbed an IV pole, full height, stainless steel, heavy enough to use as a weapon, and ripped it from its base like pulling a weed. He swung it in a wide arc. Glass shattered. Equipment exploded. People dove for cover. Dr. Hess appeared from one of the trauma rooms, took one look at the chaos, and immediately retreated back inside, slamming the door. Patricia Kilgore screamed, "Call 911! Get security! Get—" The giant turned toward her voice. His eyes were wrong, wide and wild, and seeing something that wasn't there, locked in some hell that only he could see. He took a step toward the nurses' station. Everyone ran. Nurses scattered in every direction. Patients fled. The unit clerk dove under her desk. Someone hit the panic button. Alarms began wailing throughout the hospital. Everyone ran except Lena Martinez. She stood perfectly still near the supply closet where she'd been stationed for most of the night, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at her sides, head tilted slightly as she watched the giant's movements with the kind of focused intensity most people reserved for defusing bombs. He wasn't drunk. His movements were too controlled, too purposeful despite the chaos. He wasn't on drugs. His pupils were wrong for that, and his coordination was too good. He was seeing something, experiencing something, but it wasn't here and now. He was somewhere else, sometime else. Combat, battlefield, trauma. The giant roared again and smashed the IV pole into the triage desk, splintering wood and scattering paperwork. His eyes darted around the room, tracking targets that didn't exist, threats that weren't there. "Lena, get out of there," someone yelled from behind a barricaded door. She didn't know who, didn't care. She studied his stance. The way he held the IV pole, not like a club, like a rifle. The way he moved, clearing corners, checking angles, maintaining tactical positioning. This wasn't random violence. This was training, muscle memory, a soldier's brain hijacked by trauma and trapped in a war that never ended. The giant's eyes swept across the room and locked onto her. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The alarms faded. The screaming became distant. The world narrowed to just the two of them. The 7-foot soldier trapped in his personal hell, and the small, quiet nurse everyone had dismissed as too soft for emergency medicine. Lena didn't run. She didn't hide. She didn't scream. She took one step forward, then another. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady and completely without fear. "Sergeant!" The giant flinched. His grip on the IV pole shifted. "Eyes on me, Sergeant. You're safe. Do you hear me? You're safe." His chest was heaving. Blood dripped from cuts on his hands where he'd gone through the glass. His eyes were still wild, still seeing horrors that weren't there. But he wasn't swinging anymore. Lena took another step closer, her movement slow and deliberate, her hands visible and non-threatening. "What's your name, Sergeant?" The giant's mouth moved. No sound came out at first, just a strangled gasp. Then, barely audible beneath the alarms, "Carter. Staff Sergeant Marcus Carter." "Staff Sergeant Carter," Lena repeated, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "I need you to look at me, not at them. At me. Can you do that?" His eyes focused on her face, really focused, seeing her instead of whatever battlefield was playing out in his head. "Good," she said quietly. "That's good. Now I need you to put down the pole, Staff Sergeant. Can you do that for me?" Behind her, she could hear whispered voices. Someone was probably calling the police. Someone else was probably trying to figure out how to evacuate patients without getting killed. Dr. Hess was probably still hiding in the trauma room. Patricia Kilgore was probably having a breakdown somewhere. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the broken soldier in front of her and the fragile thread of connection she'd managed to establish. Marcus Carter's hand shook. The IV pole wavered. Where am I?" "You're at Mercy Heights Medical Center in Clearwater Falls. You're safe. There's no combat here. No enemy. You're home, Staff Sergeant. Home, he repeated, like testing the word in a foreign language. That's right. You're home. But I need you to put down the pole. Nice and slow. Can you do that? For a moment she thought he would. His grip loosened. The pole started to lower. And then someone chose that exact moment to make the worst possible decision. The door to the staff emergency exit burst open, and 3 Clearwater Falls police officers rushed in with weapons drawn, shouting commands that all blurred together into meaningless noise. Drop the weapon! Get on the ground! Hands where we can see them! Do it now! Marcus Carter's eyes went wide. The battlefield snapped back into focus. He wasn't in a hospital anymore. He was back in whatever hell had broken him. And these weren't police officers. They were enemy combatants. And Lena wasn't a nurse trying to help him. She was a hostile in civilian clothing standing too close. Everything happened at once. Marcus dropped the IV pole and lunged forward, his massive hand closing around Lena's throat, lifting her clean off the ground. Her feet dangled in the air. His grip was iron, crushing, cutting off her air supply with the efficiency of someone who'd been trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. Shoot him! Someone screamed. Shoot him now! Police officers advanced with weapons raised, fingers on triggers, shouting commands that Marcus Carter couldn't hear anymore because he wasn't here. He was in Kandahar or Fallujah or some other place where everything was trying to kill him, and the only way to survive was to kill first. Lena's face was turning red. Her hands came up to his wrist, not panicking, not clawing, just touching, finding the pressure points, calculating. She had maybe 3 seconds before she lost consciousness. Maybe 5 before she suffered permanent damage. Maybe 10 before it didn't matter anymore. The police were closing in. Someone was screaming. The alarms were still wailing. The world was chaos and noise and violence. Lena Martinez stopped fighting the hand around her throat. Instead, in one smooth motion born from hundreds of hours of training that nobody here knew she had, she brought both hands up, braced them against Marcus Carter's wrist, and twisted her entire body in a sharp downward spiral that broke his grip through pure biomechanics and leverage. She dropped to the ground, landed in a crouch, and before he could react, before the police could fire, before anyone could process what they were seeing, she moved. Not like a nurse, like a weapon. She flowed behind him, using his own forward momentum against him. Her small frame suddenly pressed against his massive back, her right arm snaking around his throat while her left hand locked behind his head. The rear naked choke was textbook perfect. Precise placement, exact pressure, cutting off blood flow to the brain without crushing the windpipe. Marcus Carter's hands came up to grab at her arms, but his movements were already slowing. His knees buckled, his eyes rolled back. 4 seconds. That's how long it took. The 7-foot soldier collapsed face first onto the ER floor, with a crash that shook the room, completely unconscious. Lena released the choke immediately, checked his pulse, strong and steady, and rolled him into recovery position so he wouldn't choke if he vomited. Then she stood up, brushed her scrubs down, and looked at the police officers with the same calm expression she'd worn all night. Total silence. Everyone was staring at her. The nurses, the patients who hadn't fled, the police officers with their weapons still raised. Dr. Hess, who'd finally emerged from his hiding place and stood frozen in the doorway. Patricia Kilgore's mouth was hanging open. One of the police officers, a senior sergeant with 20 years on the job and a chest full of commendations, lowered his weapon slowly. What the hell was that? Lena blinked at him, her expression utterly neutral. A bilateral carotid restraint. He'll wake up in a few minutes with a headache, but no permanent damage. He needs psychiatric evaluation and probably sedation, and someone should check him for traumatic brain injury. His pupils were slightly dilated. Who are you? Lena Martinez, RN. I work here. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Where did you learn to do that? Before Lena could answer, before she could decide what lie to tell, the emergency doors burst open again, and this time it wasn't a patient or police or hospital security. It was soldiers, real soldiers. Not security guards in uniform, not police with guns, but active-duty military personnel in tactical gear with weapons that looked very much not designed for domestic law enforcement. They moved with the kind of coordinated precision that came from years of training and combat deployments. 4 of them entered first, establishing a perimeter. then 4 more. Then a final figure who walked in like he owned not just the room, but the entire concept of authority itself. The uniform was spotless. The insignia on his shoulders showed 3 stars. The man wearing it was in his late 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that had given 10,000 orders and never once doubted he'd be obeyed. A 3-star general. In a civilian hospital. At midnight. Less than 5 minutes after Marcus Carter had gone down. The police sergeant tensed. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. I'm going to need you to—" The general held up one hand. A younger soldier immediately produced a tablet and showed it to the police sergeant, who read whatever was on the screen and went pale. "Understood, sir," the sergeant said quietly, and gestured for his officers to lower their weapons. The general walked past him without acknowledgement, his eyes scanning the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd assessed combat situations in places most people couldn't find on a map. His gaze passed over the destroyed triage desk, the shattered glass, the unconscious Marcus Carter, the terrified hospital staff. Then his eyes found Lena. He stopped walking. For just a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or surprise, or something else entirely. "Secure the patient," he said without looking away from her. Full medical workup, then transfer to Walter Reed under psychiatric emergency protocols. No local police involvement. This falls under military jurisdiction. 2 soldiers moved immediately to Marcus Carter, checking his vitals, preparing him for transport with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first extraction. The general took 3 steps toward Lena. The entire ER seemed to hold its breath. "You're the nurse who subdued him." It wasn't a question. Lena met his eyes and said nothing. That was a textbook perfect rear naked choke, military-grade restraint technique. "Where exactly did you learn that, nurse?" He glanced at her ID badge. Something changed in his expression. "Martinez." Lena's heart rate didn't spike. Her breathing didn't change. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, but inside, behind the careful mask, alarms were screaming. He knew. Somehow, he knew. "Self-defense classes," she said quietly. "You never know what's going to come through those doors." Self-defense classes. The general's eyes were ice-cold blue, the kind that had stared down enemy combatants and rebel insurgents, and probably senators who asked too many questions. "You executed a bilateral carotid restraint on a 250-pound combat veteran in active psychotic break, maintained perfect form under pressure, and put him down in under 5 seconds without causing permanent injury. That's not something you learn at the local YMCA." "I got lucky." Luck. He took another step closer. Around them, his soldiers had Marcus Carter on a gurney, already hooking him up to portable monitors. The police were standing back, officially removed from the situation. The hospital staff was watching from a safe distance. Nobody was close enough to hear what the general said next. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, meant only for Lena's ears. "I know who you are." Lena's expression didn't change. "I'm a nurse at Mercy Heights Medical Center." "You're a ghost. You're someone who died 2 years ago in an incident that officially never happened in a place we officially were never operating." His eyes bored into hers. "And you just put down one of my soldiers using techniques you should have no knowledge of." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" The general's hand moved to his jacket pocket. For a terrible moment, Lena thought he was going for a weapon, thought this entire situation was about to go sideways in ways that would end with her disappeared into some black site where questions didn't need answers. Instead, he pulled out a phone, pulled up a video, turned the screen toward her. It was security footage from the ER, the incident from minutes ago, showing her taking down Marcus Carter. But the general's fingers were already swiping, bringing up another video. And another. Facial recognition software running comparisons. Database searches pulling up files that officially didn't exist. And there, on the screen, was a photograph of a woman in military fatigues with a medic's insignia and a clearance level that would have been redacted if the file had ever been officially declassified. The woman looked exactly like Lena Martinez, except her hair was shorter and her name was different, and she was standing in front of a military facility that the general's finger had very deliberately covered with his thumb. "Explain this," he said quietly. Lena looked at the photo, at her own face from a lifetime ago, at evidence of a person she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten who she'd been. Then she looked back at the general and said, with perfect calm, "I don't know who that is." He studied her for a long moment. Behind him, his soldiers were wheeling Marcus Carter toward the exit. The police were gathering statements. Patricia Kilgore was trying to restore order. Dr. Hess was attempting to reassert authority. Nobody was watching them. Nobody could hear. The general leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "I ran the operation that burned your unit. I gave the order to pull support when the contractors turned. I signed the papers that listed you as KIA, and I've spent 2 years believing that was true." His jaw tightened. "So, either you're the world's most impossible coincidence, or you're exactly who I think you are. And if you're who I think you are, we have a serious problem." "Why?" Lena asked, her voice still perfectly neutral. "If I'm dead, I'm not your problem anymore." Because Marcus Carter was part of that same operation. Because he's been having psychotic breaks for 6 months, seeing enemies that aren't there, reliving combat scenarios from that specific mission. Because 3 other soldiers from that unit are dead, officially suicide, officially unrelated. The general's eyes were hard. "And because if you're alive, it means someone's been cleaning up witnesses, and the next person they come for might be you." Lena's stomach went cold. "I'm just a nurse." "Right." The general straightened, his expression shifting back to professional neutrality. His voice rose to normal volume, loud enough for the room to hear. "Thank you for your assistance, Ms. Martinez. The military appreciates your quick thinking in a dangerous situation." He turned to leave, his soldiers falling in formation around Marcus Carter's gurney. Then he paused at the door and looked back. "If I were you, I'd be very careful going home tonight. Make sure you're not followed. Make sure your doors are locked. Make sure you stay somewhere public and well lit." His eyes met hers one final time. "Self-defense classes can only take you so far." And then he was gone, his soldiers flowing out behind him with Marcus Carter, leaving the ER in shocked silence. Lena stood perfectly still, processing the implications, processing the fact that her past had just walked through those doors and recognized her, processing the fact that whatever cover she'd built was now compromised, processing the fact that if the general was right about someone cleaning up witnesses, she was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. The soldiers' boots were still echoing down the hallway when Patricia Kilgore found her voice again. "What in the absolute hell was that?" Nobody answered. The ER staff stood frozen in various states of shock, staring at the destruction like survivors of a natural disaster trying to process what had just happened. Shattered glass glittered across the floor. The triage desk was split down the middle. Blood smeared the linoleum where Marcus Carter had torn through the entrance. Equipment lay scattered and broken. The waiting room looked like a war zone. Lena Martinez stood exactly where the general had left her, her face still calm, her breathing still controlled, her hands still steady at her sides. Inside, her mind was racing through contingencies and exit strategies and the very real possibility that she had maybe 12 hours before someone decided she was a loose end that needed tying up. "Martinez," Dr. Hess's voice cut through the stunned silence. He'd emerged fully from his hiding place now, straightening his coat with the kind of forced dignity that couldn't quite hide the shame of having run while his staff faced danger. "What exactly did that general mean about you having military training?" Lena turned to face him, her expression perfectly blank. "I don't have military training, sir. I took some self-defense classes in college." "Self-defense classes," he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You subdued a 7-foot psychotic veteran using advanced combat techniques, and you expect me to believe you learned that at a college gym?" "I got lucky." "That wasn't luck. That was expertise." Dr. Hess took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you really? What aren't you telling us?" Patricia Kilgore crossed her arms, her earlier dismissiveness replaced with something harder and more suspicious. "You know what? She's right. That whole situation was wrong. The way she moved, the way she talked to him, like she knew exactly what buttons to push. Normal nurses don't do that. Normal nurses run." "I was trying to help," Lena said quietly. "Help?" Patricia's voice rose. "You could have gotten everyone killed. What if he'd snapped your neck? What if those police had opened fire? What if... But he didn't, and they didn't. Lena's voice remained level, factual, completely devoid of emotion. Staff Sergeant Carter is alive and getting the help he needs. Nobody died. Nobody was seriously injured except the security guards, and they're being treated now. That's not the point. Then what is the point, Patricia? The charge nurse's face flushed red. The point is that you're hiding something. The point is that you've been working here for 3 months, acting like some meek little mouse who can barely handle basic nursing duties. And then the second things go sideways, you turn into some kind of action hero. That doesn't add up. Something's wrong with you. The other nurses were watching now, their expressions a mixture of awe and unease. Sarah, or maybe Jessica, spoke up hesitantly. I mean, she did save everyone. If she hadn't calmed him down, she endangered everyone, Patricia snapped. She violated every protocol we have for violent patient situations. She put herself and everyone else at risk with some cowboy heroics that could have ended in a bloodbath. She turned back to Lena, her eyes hard. I'm recommending your immediate suspension pending a full review. You can wait in the break room until hospital administration arrives. Patricia, that seems a bit extreme, Dr. Hess started, then stopped when she shot him a look that could have melted steel. You ran and hid in a trauma room, Raymond. I don't think you get a vote. Patricia's attention swung back to Lena. Break room, now. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Don't even think about leaving the building until we get some answers about who you really are. Lena held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make it clear she wasn't intimidated, not long enough to make it a challenge, then nodded once and turned toward the break room. Her footsteps were silent on the glass-strewn floor. Behind her, she could hear Patricia already on the phone, probably calling hospital security, definitely calling administration, possibly calling the police to run background checks. Good luck with that, Lena thought. The background they'd find was bulletproof. Lena Martinez had a birth certificate, school records, nursing degree, state licensure, work history, rental agreements, bank accounts, social media presence, everything a real person would have. All of it legitimate because technically she was a real person, just not the person everyone thought she was. The break room was empty and depressingly familiar. Industrial microwave, dying coffee maker, table covered in old pizza boxes and outdated medical journals, bulletin board plastered with OSHA regulations and passive-aggressive notes about refrigerator theft. Lena sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls, all from numbers she didn't recognize, all within the last 10 minutes. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the call log, debating. The smart move was to ignore them, destroy the phone, disappear tonight before whoever was cleaning up loose ends realized she was still breathing. She had a go bag in her apartment, cash, fake IDs, burner phones, everything she needed to vanish completely. She could be on a bus to anywhere by dawn, gone before anyone thought to look. But if she ran now, she'd never know why Marcus Carter had the same trauma she'd survived. She'd never know who gave the order to abandon her unit. She'd never know who turned those contractors into executioners, or why 3 soldiers were already dead. She'd never know if running would even matter, or if she was already on someone's list regardless. The break room door opened. Lena's hand moved automatically to her pocket, where she'd kept a folding knife back when she'd been someone else, then stopped when she remembered she was a nurse now, and nurses didn't carry weapons. Senior nurse Diana Cho slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind her. She was in her early 40s, competent and unflappable, one of the few people at Mercy Heights who'd ever treated Lena like an actual human being instead of dead weight. Are you okay? Diana asked, sitting down across from her. I'm fine. That was incredible. What you did out there. I've never seen anything like it. Lena said nothing. Diana studied her face for a long moment. Patricia's calling everyone she can think of to get you fired. Jake Bokers. Hess is backing her up because he's embarrassed he hid instead of helping. Hospital security is reviewing footage. Administration is in full panic mode. She paused. They're going to dig into your background. If there's anything in your past you don't want found, there isn't. Lena. Diana's voice was gentle but firm. I was an army nurse for 12 years before I came here. I did 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. I know what combat training looks like. I know what it sounds like when someone speaks to a soldier in their own language. She leaned forward slightly. That man was having a severe PTSD episode, and you talked him down using tactics that no civilian would know. So either you're the world's luckiest nursing student, or you've been in situations most people can't even imagine. Lena met her eyes. What do you want me to say? The truth would be nice. The truth is that a patient came into this ER having a psychiatric crisis, and I helped de-escalate the situation. That's my job. Your job is to call security and get out of the way. I did what I thought was right. Diana sighed. Look, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm trying to help you because right now you've got hospital administration breathing down your neck, and if they start digging and find discrepancies in your file, they won't. You seem very sure of that. I am. They sat in silence for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, ambulance sirens wailed. The ER was returning to its normal chaos, new patients arriving, old patients being discharged, the endless cycle of crisis and recovery that never stopped no matter how much glass got shattered or how many secrets got exposed. That general knew you, Diana said quietly. I saw the way he looked at you, like he'd seen a ghost. Lena's expression didn't change. He was probably just surprised that a nurse could handle the situation. He called you a ghost. Said you died 2 years ago. Diana's eyes were sharp. I'm a very good lip reader, Lena. I saw the whole conversation. The temperature in the break room seemed to drop. Lena's mind calculated distances, exit routes, whether Diana was a threat or just inconveniently observant, whether this conversation was about to become a problem that needed solving. You didn't hear anything, Lena said, her voice flat and harder than she'd ever let it get at this hospital. I heard enough to know you're in danger. Diana didn't flinch, didn't back down. Whatever you're running from, whoever you used to be, it just caught up with you, and I'm guessing you don't have a lot of people you can trust right now. I don't trust anyone. Smart. But you're going to need help whether you want it or not. Diana pulled out her own phone and pulled up a news article. 3 soldiers dead in 6 months, all from the same classified unit, all ruled suicide. But the families are screaming cover-up. The VA is stonewalling. And now a 4th soldier from that same unit just got extracted by military intelligence less than an hour after having a psychotic break in a civilian hospital. She turned the phone toward Lena. You want to tell me that's all coincidence? Lena stared at the article, photographs of 3 young men in uniform, their names blacked out in the version accessible to civilian media, but their faces clear enough. She recognized all of them. Rodriguez, who'd been the unit's communications specialist. Chen, who could field strip a rifle blindfolded. Williams, who'd saved her life in the firefight that technically never happened. All dead. All within 6 months. All after the contractors turned. How did you find this? Lena asked quietly. I have friends in veteran advocacy groups. They've been tracking suspicious deaths among special operations personnel for years. There's a pattern. Diana's voice was grim. Someone's eliminating witnesses to something. And if you were part of that unit, I wasn't part of anything. I'm a nurse at Mercy Heights Medical Center. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Diana leaned back, her expression softening slightly. Look, I'm not asking you to trust me with your whole story. I'm just saying that whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to deal with it alone. If you need help... The break room door slammed open. Patricia Kilgore stood in the doorway with 2 hospital security guards flanking her. Her face was triumphant in a way that made Lena's stomach tighten. Lena Martinez, you need to come with us. Now. Diana stood. Patricia, this is unnecessary. She hasn't done anything wrong. That's not your call to make, Diana. Step aside. Patricia's eyes were bright with vindication. We've been reviewing security footage and making some phone calls. Turns out our little rookie here has some very interesting gaps in her employment history. Lena's pulse didn't spike. Her breathing stayed even, but inside, alarms were screaming. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Patricia pulled out a tablet and turned it toward her. According to your resume, you worked as a medical assistant at St. Vincent's Hospital in Seattle for 2 years before nursing school. Except we just called St. Vincent's HR department, and they have no record of you ever working there. Shit. The cover identity had a gap, a necessary gap, because those 2 years she'd supposedly been working in Seattle, She'd actually been deployed in places that didn't officially exist, doing things that technically never happened. The identity team had plugged the hole with a defunct hospital that had merged with another facility and lost personnel records in the transition. It should have held up to basic scrutiny, but Patricia wasn't doing basic scrutiny. Patricia was digging like someone who'd decided Lena was guilty of something and was determined to prove it. There was a records transfer issue when the hospitals merged, Lena said calmly. I can provide pay stubs. I'm sure you can provide all kinds of documentation. Patricia's smile was sharp as broken glass. The question is whether any of it's real. Hospital administration has authorized a complete background investigation. We're contacting every school, every employer, every reference you've listed. And until we verify your credentials, you're suspended from duty effective immediately. Diana stepped forward. This is ridiculous. You're punishing her for stopping a violent patient. I'm protecting this hospital from a potential liability. For all we know, she doesn't even have a legitimate nursing license. Patricia gestured to the security guards. Escort Ms. Martinez off hospital property. She's not permitted to return until the investigation is complete. The security guards looked uncomfortable, probably because they'd both seen Lena take down a 7-foot soldier and weren't eager to put their hands on her, but they moved forward nonetheless. Lena stood slowly, her movements deliberately non-threatening. I'll go voluntarily. You don't need to escort me. Standard procedure, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false professionalism. Please surrender your ID badge and any hospital property in your possession. Lena unclipped her badge and set it on the break room table, pulled out her phone and the small notebook she kept for patient notes, and set those down too. She didn't have anything else. She'd learned a long time ago not to keep personal items at work, not to leave traces that could be used to track her. This way, Ms. Martinez. One of the security guards, a middle-aged man named Davis, who'd always been polite to her, gestured toward the exit. He looked apologetic. I'm sorry about this. Don't be. You're just doing your job. They walked through the ER in silence. The other nurses watched her go with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion to relief. Dr. Hess was conveniently absent. Patients stared as she passed. Someone had already started cleaning up the broken glass, but the destruction was still visible. Physical evidence of violence that everyone would remember, that everyone would talk about, that would cement Lena Martinez in hospital legend as either a hero or a dangerous liability, depending on who was telling the story. The automatic doors slid open. Cold night air hit her face. The parking lot stretched dark and empty under flickering streetlights. Her car was parked in the employee lot at the far end. A 15-year-old Honda Civic that ran well and looked forgettable, exactly the kind of vehicle someone trying not to be noticed would drive. You need someone to walk you to your car? Davis asked, genuine concern in his voice. I'm fine, thank you. Look, for what it's worth, I think Patricia's being a bitch about this. What you did tonight was brave. Lena gave him a small smile, the first genuine emotion she'd shown all night. I appreciate that. She walked toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the empty lot, hyper-aware of every shadow and every potential threat. The general's warning echoed in her mind. Make sure you're not followed. Make sure your doors are locked. Make sure you stay somewhere public and well lit. Good advice. She wasn't going to take any of it. Her apartment was already compromised. Anyone digging into her background would have that address within hours. Her car was registered in her name, easily traceable. Her phone was probably being tracked. Everything about Lena Martinez, the civilian nurse, was now a liability. But she wasn't Lena Martinez, the civilian nurse, anymore. The moment that General recognized her, the moment Patricia started digging, the moment those phone calls came through from unknown numbers, she'd stopped being Lena and started being what she'd been before. A ghost. A survivor. Someone very good at staying alive when people wanted her dead. She reached her car and paused with her hand on the door, every sense alert. The parking lot felt wrong. Not empty wrong, but watched wrong. That prickling sensation on the back of her neck that meant someone's eyes were on you, someone's crosshairs were tracking you, someone's finger was tightening on a trigger. Lena didn't turn around, didn't scan for threats, just calmly unlocked her car, slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot at exactly the speed limit, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. No headlights followed, no vehicles pulled out behind her. The street was empty. Too empty. She drove 3 blocks, turned left, drove 2 more blocks, turned right, watching for tails. Nothing. She took a deliberately inefficient route toward her apartment, doubling back twice, running 1 red light, taking an alley that barely fit her car. Standard counter-surveillance tactics that should have flushed out anyone following. Still nothing. Either she was being paranoid, or whoever was watching her was good enough not to be spotted. She was betting on the second option. Lena pulled into the parking garage beneath her apartment building, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that had been trying to gentrify for a decade without success. She parked in her assigned spot, killed the engine, and sat in the dark for exactly 60 seconds, listening. The garage was silent. No footsteps. No engines. No breathing except her own. She got out of the car and walked toward the elevator with measured steps, keys in her hand, hyper-aware of every shadow and echo. The elevator arrived with a ding that sounded too loud in the empty space. She stepped inside, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and watched the doors slide shut. The elevator climbed. Lena counted heartbeats, calculating how long it would take someone to run up the stairs if they wanted to intercept her. 45 seconds, maybe a minute, if they weren't in good shape. The doors opened on the 4th floor. The hallway was empty and poorly lit, exactly as always. Water-stained carpet, flickering fluorescent lights. Doors to apartments where people minded their own business and asked no questions. Lena walked to 4C, her apartment, the place she'd called home for 3 months and never once felt safe. Her keys were already in her hand. She unlocked the door in a single smooth motion, slipped inside, locked it behind her, and stood perfectly still in the darkness, listening. The apartment was silent. Nothing disturbed. No hint that anyone had been inside while she was gone. But something felt wrong. Lena moved through the apartment without turning on lights, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, checking every room. The kitchen was untouched. The bathroom was clear. The bedroom looked exactly as she'd left it. Bed made with military precision, closet organized, nothing personal or revealing anywhere visible. The go bag was still under the bed where she'd hidden it. She pulled it out, unzipped it, checked the contents. Cash. $10,000 in mixed bills. 3 fake IDs with matching credit cards. 2 burner phones. Change of clothes. First aid kit. Combat knife. Backup documentation that would let her become someone else entirely within 24 hours. Everything was there. Everything was ready. Lena sat on the edge of her bed with the go bag at her feet and pulled out one of the burner phones. She had maybe an hour before she needed to make a decision. Run or stay, disappear or stand ground, become a ghost again, or try to be a person. The phone in her pocket, her real phone, the one registered to Lena Martinez, buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at the screen. Every instinct screamed not to answer, to destroy the phone, to run, but something made her swipe to accept the call. Hello? Silence on the other end. Not dead air, but breathing. Someone was there. I know you can hear me, Lena said quietly. Who is this? More silence. Then a voice, male, filtered through some kind of distortion software that turned it into something mechanical and inhuman. You were supposed to be dead. Lena's blood went cold. Who is this? You know who this is. You know what happens to loose ends. You know what happened to Rodriguez and Chen and Williams. A pause. You should have stayed dead, Ghost. Now we have to fix that mistake. The line went dead. Lena sat perfectly still, the phone still pressed to her ear, processing the implications. They knew her call sign. They knew she was alive. They knew where to find her. And they were coming. She dropped the phone, grabbed the go bag, and was halfway to the door when she heard it, the subtle metallic click of a lock being professionally picked. Not her front door. Her bedroom window's fire escape access, the one she'd left deliberately easy to breach because she'd wanted a secondary exit route and never imagined someone would use it to come in. Lena spun, her hand diving into the go bag for the combat knife, her mind calculating distances and angles and how many seconds she had before whoever was coming through that window made it inside. The window slid open silently. A figure in black tactical gear flowed through with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of hundreds of insertions. Then another figure. Then a third. Professional. Military trained. Here to clean up a loose end. The first figure's hand came up, silenced pistol tracking toward her center mass. Lena moved. Not toward the door, not toward escape. Toward them. The knife was already in her hand as she closed the distance, using the darkness and their brief moment of surprise to her advantage. She'd spent 2 years learning to fight people bigger and stronger and better armed than her. She'd learned that speed and aggression and willingness to do terrible things could overcome nearly any tactical advantage. The first figure fired. Lena was already moving, the suppressed round punching into the wall where she'd been standing. She came in low and fast, her knife finding the gap between body armor panels, the blade sliding home with the kind of practiced precision that came from muscle memory she'd tried to forget. The figure collapsed. The second figure was already adjusting, weapon tracking, but Lena grabbed the falling body and used it as a shield, pulling the dropped pistol free as rounds thudded into dead flesh. She fired twice over the corpse's shoulder. Both rounds found their target. The second figure went down. The third figure had better training. Instead of engaging, they dove back through the window onto the fire escape, already calling for backup on a radio she could hear crackling in the darkness. Lena dropped the body she'd been using as a shield and ran for the window, but she knew she was too late. She could hear boots pounding up the fire escape. At least 4 more, maybe 6. Too many to fight. Too many to escape. She had maybe 30 seconds before they breached in force. Lena grabbed her go bag, ran for the front door, ripped it open, and stopped dead. Standing in the hallway, blocking her escape, was General 3 Stars from the hospital. No soldiers this time. No backup. Just him, in civilian clothes, hands visible and empty. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Right now. Before the cleanup team gets here and this becomes significantly worse." Behind her, she could hear the window being breached properly, multiple figures pouring through with professional precision. In front of her stood the man who'd given the order to abandon her unit, who'd signed her death certificate, who'd spent 2 years thinking she was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere she'd never officially been. And she had about 15 seconds to decide which threat to choose. Lena's hand tightened on the pistol she'd taken from the dead operative, the barrel trained directly at the general's center mass. Behind her, boots hammered across her apartment floor. In front of her stood the man who'd left her to die. She had maybe 10 seconds before the situation became unwinnable. "Your choice," the general said, his voice calm despite the weapon pointed at his chest. "Come with me and maybe we both survive the night, or stay here and guarantee we both die in the next 60 seconds. Give me one reason to trust you." "I can't, but I can give you a reason to run." He tilted his head slightly, listening to the same sounds she was hearing. Tactical teams coordinating, weapons being readied, breach protocols being executed. "Those aren't my people. They're contract killers working for whoever's cleaning up the mess I made 2 years ago. If they take you, you disappear into a black site and nobody ever asks questions. If they take me, same outcome, different room." The apartment door behind him, someone's apartment, not hers, burst open and Diana Cho appeared, still in her scrubs, her face pale, but determined. "There's a service elevator at the end of the hall. It goes straight to the parking garage. Move now or we're all dead." Lena's mind processed the impossible variables in the span of a heartbeat. Diana shouldn't be here. The general shouldn't be alone. The tactical team behind her shouldn't be trying to kill a 3-star general unless something had gone catastrophically wrong at levels far above a discharged combat medic turned civilian nurse. She made her decision. "Go!" she snapped at the general, already moving, the pistol still in her hand but no longer aimed at him. They ran down the hallway as her apartment door exploded inward with a breaching charge that shook the entire floor. Shouts erupted. Flashbangs detonated. Her neighbors' doors stayed firmly closed. Nobody in this building was stupid enough to investigate gunfire. Diana led them around a corner to a freight elevator that looked like it hadn't passed inspection in a decade. The doors were already open, held by a fire extinguisher jammed in the track. They piled inside. Diana kicked the extinguisher free and hammered the garage button as footsteps pounded toward them. The doors started to close with agonizing slowness. Lena could see figures in black tactical gear rounding the corner, weapons raised. She fired 3 rounds through the narrowing gap, not to kill, just to make them think twice about rushing the elevator. The doors sealed shut with a final mechanical clunk. The elevator dropped with a lurch that suggested the cable was one frayed strand away from catastrophic failure. Nobody spoke. The ancient machinery groaned and rattled. Lena checked her stolen pistol, 7 rounds left in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to be dangerous. "How did you find me?" she asked the general without looking at him. "I never stopped tracking you. When the official reports came back listing you as KIA, I had my own people verify. They found a body matching your general description in the wreckage, dental records too damaged to confirm, DNA samples that somehow got lost in processing." His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. "I knew it wasn't you. You're too smart to die that easily. Yet you signed the papers anyway." "I signed what I was told to sign, and then I spent 2 years trying to figure out who gave that order and why." The elevator shuddered. They dropped another floor. "Turns out I wasn't the only one asking questions. 3 months ago, Rodriguez contacted me through back channels. Said he had evidence that the contractor team that turned on us wasn't rogue. They were following orders. Said he could prove it, that he had documentation." "Let me guess," Lena said quietly. 2 weeks later, he ate his service pistol. Officially. Except Rodriguez was left-handed, and the wound was right-side entry. The investigators either didn't notice or didn't care. The general's jaw tightened. Chen died in a car accident that forensics said was a brake line failure. Williams fell down his apartment stairs drunk, except his wife swore he hadn't touched alcohol in 3 years. And Marcus Carter started having psychotic breaks that put him in psychiatric facilities where he couldn't talk to anyone. Diana spoke up, her voice tight. "Someone's eliminating everyone who knows what really happened. Everyone who could testify." Not someone. A very specific contractor security firm called Aegis Strategic Solutions. They were the ones who provided security for our operation, the ones who turned, the ones who tried to kill everyone to cover up whatever they were really doing there. The elevator rattled past the 2nd floor. "They have connections at every level. DOD, CIA, Homeland Security. Enough reach to make people disappear and call it suicide. Enough power to have a 3-star general marked for termination the moment he started asking the wrong questions." The elevator hit the parking garage with a metallic screech that sounded like the entire mechanism was about to collapse. The doors opened onto concrete pillars and shadow, and the distant sound of vehicles approaching fast. "How long do we have?" Lena asked. "Minutes. They'll have teams covering every exit, traffic cameras tracking every vehicle, facial recognition running at every intersection within a 5-mile radius." The general moved toward a black SUV parked in the corner. Bulletproof glass, reinforced frame, the kind of vehicle designed to survive ambushes. "Get in." "Diana, you too." "I have my own car." "Your car is already compromised. They know you helped her. You're a loose end now too." He unlocked the SUV with a key fob. "Get in or stay here and explain to the kill team why you're innocent. Your choice." Diana got in the back seat. Lena took shotgun, her stolen pistol resting on her thigh, eyes scanning for threats. The general started the engine and peeled out of the garage fast enough to leave rubber on the concrete. They emerged onto a side street 3 blocks from Lena's building. The night was cold and dark and empty except for 2 black vans that appeared from nowhere, boxing them in from both directions. "Hold on," the general said calmly, and floored it. The SUV had the kind of engine that turned consumer vehicles into battering rams. They hit the van in front at 40 miles an hour with enough force to spin it sideways and blow through the gap. Gunfire erupted from the second van. Rounds sparked off the armored panels. The rear window spiderwebbed but didn't shatter. Diana screamed. Lena braced against the dashboard as they fishtailed around a corner. The general driving with the kind of precision that came from combat deployments in places where traffic laws were suggestions and IEDs were reality. They ran 2 red lights, cut through a gas station parking lot, merged onto the highway going 30 over the speed limit. The pursuing vans fell back but didn't disappear. Lena could see them in the side mirror, keeping pace, waiting for the right moment to force them off the road. "Where are we going?" she asked. Safe house, 20 minutes north. Military-grade security, secure communications, enough supplies to hold out for 72 hours while I call in favors and figure out who I can still trust. The general merged into faster traffic, using civilian vehicles as cover. In the meantime, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail. Everything that happened before the contractors turned. Lena was silent for a long moment, her mind dragging up memories she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. The firebase in the mountains. The mission briefing that didn't make sense. The civilian contractors who outnumbered military personnel 3-1. The locked shipping containers nobody was allowed to inspect. We were guarding something, she said finally. Something they didn't want us to know about. The official mission brief said we were providing security for a CIA asset extraction, but that was bullshit. There were no assets, no extraction, just those containers and a lot of nervous contractors who got real jumpy whenever anyone asked questions. Did you see what was inside? No, but Rodriguez did. He was running a communications check and intercepted encrypted radio traffic. Said it was procurement codes for weapon systems that aren't supposed to exist outside of classified black budget programs. She watched the pursuing vans in the mirror. They were changing positions, flanking maneuver. He tried to tell the mission commander 20 minutes later the contractors opened fire on everyone. The general's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They weren't rogue. They were covering up evidence. And everyone who saw those containers, everyone who heard those radio intercepts, everyone who could connect the dots, they all had to die. Except they didn't get everyone, Lena said. Marcus Carter survived. I survived. And apparently you've been digging into classified operations that someone very much wants to stay buried. One of the pursuing vans accelerated suddenly, pulling alongside them. The side door slid open and a figure with a rifle leaned out, aiming not at the armored panels but at the tires. "Down!" the general shouted. The rifle barked. The front passenger tire exploded. The SUV lurched violently to the right, the general fighting the wheel as they careened across 2 lanes of traffic. Horns blared. Cars swerved. They sideswiped a sedan and kept going, sparks flying from the destroyed tire's rim grinding against asphalt. The second van moved to block them from the front. The first van closed from behind. They were being corralled toward an off-ramp that led into an industrial area. Dark, empty, no witnesses. "I can't outrun them on 3 tires, the general said through gritted teeth. "We're going to have to fight." Lena checked her pistol again. 8 rounds total. Diana was unarmed and terrified. The general probably had a weapon, but he was driving. Against 2 vans full of professional killers with automatic weapons and no legal constraints, their odds were somewhere between terrible and non-existent. The off-ramp was coming up fast. The vans were closing in. Lena's mind raced through tactical options, each one worse than the last. Then Diana's phone rang, not buzzing, actually ringing, the old-fashioned telephone sound that nobody used anymore. Diana pulled it out with shaking hands, looked at the screen, and went pale. "It's a video call," she whispered. "From inside Mercy Heights." "Don't answer it," Lena said. Diana answered it. The screen showed the ER nurse's station. Patricia Kilgore sat bound to a chair with zip ties, a strip of duct tape across her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Standing behind her was a man in civilian clothes holding a pistol to her head. "Dr. Carter," the man said, his voice smooth and professional. "I believe that's what you prefer to be called now, isn't it? Though your service records list you as Special Operations Combat Medic Elena Reyes, honorably discharged under circumstances that officially never occurred." Lena's blood turned to ice. They had her real name. They had her service record. They had everything. "You have my attention," she said. "Excellent. Here's how this works. You have exactly 10 minutes to return to Mercy Heights Medical Center and surrender yourself. Come alone, unarmed, no backup. If you comply, Charge Nurse Kilgore lives, and you get the opportunity to hear the truth about what you've been running from." The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "If you don't comply, we execute everyone in this ER one at a time and upload the footage to every news outlet in the country. Your choice." "You're bluffing. That kind of exposure would destroy whatever operation you're trying to protect." "Would it? Or would it just look like a tragic mass casualty incident perpetrated by a disturbed individual who then took her own life?" We have your service record, Dr. Carter. We have documentation of your psychiatric evaluations following the firebase incident. We have a very compelling narrative about a traumatized veteran who snapped under pressure and committed an act of workplace violence. The man tilted his head slightly. 9 minutes now. The clock is ticking. The call ended. Silence filled the SUV except for the grinding sound of metal on asphalt and the pursuing vehicle's engines. They were almost to the off-ramp, almost to the industrial area where the kill teams would have every advantage. "It's a trap," the general said. "You go back there, you're dead." "I know. They'll kill the nurse anyway. They'll kill everyone. They need to eliminate all the witnesses." "I know that too." Lena looked at the time on Diana's phone. 8 minutes, 30 seconds. "But if I don't go back, Patricia dies, and they massacre an entire ER full of innocent people just to prove a point. And even if that's a bluff, even if they're lying, I can't take that chance." Diana's voice was small and scared. "What do we do?" Lena ejected the magazine from her stolen pistol, counted the rounds one more time, and slapped it back home. 8 bullets, 2 vans full of professional killers, an ER full of hostages, 10 minutes to cross the city. Impossible odds. She'd survived worse. "Change of plans," she said to the general. "How fast can this thing go on 3 tires?" "Fast enough. Why?" "Because you're going to get me back to Mercy Heights in the next 8 minutes, and then you're going to stay outside with Diana and call every favor you have left. FBI, Homeland Security, local SWAT, everyone. Tell them there's a hostage situation at the hospital. Tell them whatever you have to tell them to get armed response on site. They'll kill you the moment you walk through those doors." Maybe. Or maybe they actually do want to talk. And this whole thing has been about silencing witnesses before we could tell anyone what we saw. Lena looked at him directly. "You said Rodriguez had evidence, documentation, proof that the contractors were following orders. Where would he hide something like that?" The general's eyes widened with understanding. Somewhere he knew it would be found if anything happened to him. Somewhere connected to the unit, to the mission, to... He stopped. "Marcus Carter. Rodriguez and Carter were best friends. If Rodriguez had documentation, he would have given it to the one person he trusted absolutely. And Carter's been having psychotic breaks for 6 months because someone's been trying to get him to reveal where that evidence is hidden." Lena's mind was racing now, connecting pieces. They can't kill him without risk of never finding it. They can't let him talk without risk of exposure. So they've been trying to break him, trying to get him to give up the location, and when that didn't work, they started eliminating everyone else who might know. Which brings us back to you, the only other survivor who might know what Rodriguez discovered. The general took the off-ramp, but instead of slowing down, he accelerated, using the damaged tire's momentum to drift through the turn. "They don't want you dead. Not yet. They want you to lead them to the evidence. Then let's give them what they want." They shot back onto surface streets, heading toward Mercy Heights at speeds that turned traffic lights into suggestions. The pursuing vans fell back slightly. Now that Lena was heading toward their objective, they didn't need to force her off the road. They just needed to follow. 7 minutes. 6. 5. Diana gripped the door handle. "This is insane. You're walking into an execution." "No," Lena said quietly. "I'm walking into the one place they can't afford to execute me until they have what they need. And once I'm inside, once they've committed to keeping me alive, that's when everything changes." "How?" "Because they're expecting a scared nurse who got lucky in a fight. They're expecting someone who runs and hides and tries to survive." Lena checked the pistol one final time. "They're not expecting someone who's been pretending to be weak for 2 years, just waiting for the right moment to stop pretending." The general took a corner hard enough to make the SUV's frame groan. "You have a plan." "Part of one. The rest I'll figure out as I go." "That's not reassuring. I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to stay alive long enough to burn down everyone who left us to die in that firebase and everyone who's been killing survivors to cover it up." She looked at him. "Are you in or out?" The general's expression hardened into something that had given orders in war zones and accepted the consequences. "I'm in, but if this goes sideways, so it's already sideways. We're just trying to make it come around full circle." Lena could see Mercy Heights in the distance now, the hospital lights bright against the dark sky. Drop me at the ambulance bay. Give me exactly 3 minutes to get inside before you make the call. That should be enough time for me to get eyes on the situation and figure out where they're holding the hostages. 3 minutes isn't enough time for any kind of tactical response. It's not supposed to be. I need them to think I came alone. I need them to think they won. She smiled without humor. People make mistakes when they think they've already won. They pulled into the hospital parking lot. The ambulance bay was clear, no obvious security, no visible threats. But Lena could feel them watching, snipers on rooftops, observers in parked vehicles, the whole area locked down by professionals who'd done this before. The SUV stopped. Lena opened the door. "Dr. Carter," the general said. She looked back. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, for the firebase, for signing those papers, for every choice I made that led to this." "Save it," Lena said. "You can apologize after we've put every single one of these bastards in the ground." She got out of the SUV and walked toward the ambulance bay entrance with her hands visible and empty, the stolen pistol left behind. Nothing but herself and 2 years of buried rage and the absolute certainty that she was done running. The automatic doors slid open. The ER was quiet, too quiet. No patients, no doctors, no sounds of medical equipment or intercom announcements, just silence and the faint smell of fear. Lena walked past the destroyed triage desk, past the trauma rooms where she'd spent 3 months being invisible, past the nurses' station where Patricia had humiliated her just hours ago. The blood from Marcus Carter's entrance was still smeared on the floor. The broken glass had been swept but not replaced. She found them in the main ER bay, 15 hospital staff members zip-tied and lined up against the wall like condemned prisoners. Patricia was still taped and bound. Dr. Hess was there too, his earlier arrogance replaced with barely contained terror. Sarah and Jessica, and half a dozen other nurses whose names Lena had never bothered learning. Security guards, orderlies, all of them staring at her with expressions that ranged from hope to accusation. And standing among them, weapons held with professional ease, were 8 men in civilian clothes who moved like soldiers and had the flat, dead eyes of people who killed for paychecks. The man who'd made the video call stepped forward. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with gray hair and the kind of forgettable face that belonged to middle management. He could have been an accountant or a regional sales director. Instead, he was the person sent to clean up witnesses. "Dr. Carter, right on time," he gestured to the staff. "As you can see, everyone is alive and unharmed. That can continue to be the case if you cooperate. What do you want?" "Information. Specifically, the location of documentation that belongs to my employer. Documentation that a deceased staff sergeant Rodriguez stole from a classified operation and hid before his unfortunate suicide." The man's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "We know he gave it to Marcus Carter. We know Carter has been too psychologically damaged to reveal its location. And we know you're the only other person Rodriguez trusted enough to involve." "I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult my intelligence. You were Rodriguez's combat medic. You saved his life twice. He wrote letters to his wife mentioning you by name, calling you family. If he was going to create a dead man's switch, he'd make sure you could access it." The man took a step closer. "Where is it?" Lena looked at the hostages, at Patricia, who'd spent months calling her weak and soft, at Dr. Hess, who'd dismissed her as dead weight, at all of them, seeing her now not as a rookie nurse but as the reason they might die tonight. "I need to see Marcus Carter," she said. "If Rodriguez told anyone, it would be him. But Carter's been having psychotic breaks. His memory is fragmented. I need to talk to him, medic to soldier, help him remember." The man studied her face for a long moment, looking for the lie. Lena kept her expression neutral, factual, the same calm competence she'd shown all night. "Carter is currently sedated at a military psychiatric facility. We can arrange transport, but it will take time." He gestured to one of his men. 4 hours, maybe 5. "In the meantime, you'll wait here with us. Your friends," he indicated the hostages, "will remain as insurance of your cooperation. Let them go. You have me." "I have you regardless. They stay until we have what we need." He smiled pleasantly. "Think of it as motivation to remember details you might have forgotten." Lena calculated angles and distances and how many of them she could take down before the others opened fire. Not enough. Not nearly enough. She needed the odds to change. Needed something to shift the balance. She needed Marcus Carter. "Can I at least check their restraints?" she asked. "Make sure circulation isn't being cut off. Some of them have been tied up for over an hour." The man considered this, then nodded. "Fine, but stay where we can see you. No sudden movements." Lena moved down the line of hostages, checking zip ties and making small adjustments while her mind raced through options. Patricia's eyes followed her, the tape across her mouth preventing speech, but not preventing the silent accusation. "This is your fault, all of this." Maybe it was. Maybe if she'd stayed dead, stayed gone, none of these people would be in danger now. Or maybe they would have found another way to eliminate witnesses, another leverage point, another massacre to bury the truth. She was checking Dr. Hess's restraints when she felt it, a small rectangular object tucked into his jacket pocket. A phone. They'd missed it when they'd confiscated everyone's devices. Lena's fingers closed around it. She palmed it with the kind of smooth misdirection that came from practice, tucking it into her waistband beneath her scrubs while she continued checking restraints. "Time's up," the man said. "Step away from them." Lena stepped back, her hands visible, the stolen phone a warm weight against her spine. 3 minutes since she'd entered the building. The general should be making calls right now. SWAT should be mobilizing. But it would take time, 20 minutes minimum, probably longer. She just needed to keep everyone alive that long. "So we wait," she said. "We wait," the man agreed. They stood in silence, surrounded by terrified hostages and professional killers, while the clock ticked down and Lena's mind worked through scenarios and contingencies and the very real possibility that she'd just walked into a trap with no way out. Then the lights went out. Not just the ER lights, the entire hospital. Emergency generators should have kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red emergency lighting. Instead, there was only darkness, complete and absolute, and the sudden sound of confusion and weapons being raised. "Everyone stay calm," the man's voice cut through the darkness. "It's just a power outage. Backup generators will—" The gunfire started from outside the hospital. Not police response. Not SWAT. Something else. Something that made the professional killer's training kick in immediately as they moved to defensive positions. Someone had just turned this hostage situation into an active combat zone, and Lena was standing in the middle of it with 15 civilians who were about to become casualties. The darkness was absolute for exactly 3 seconds. Then muzzle flashes lit the ER like strobes as the gunfire from outside intensified, and the contractors inside returned fire through the shattered windows. Lena dropped to the floor, her body already moving on instinct, combat reflexes taking over where civilian nurse protocols ended. She crawled toward the hostages, using the chaos as cover. Her hand found Patricia's shoulder, and the charge nurse flinched violently, a muffled scream behind the duct tape. Lena pressed her fingers against the woman's carotid, universal medical sign for calm down, "I'm checking your pulse," then moved to the zip ties and started working them with the small blade she'd palmed from the trauma supply cart when she'd been checking restraints. The plastic gave way. Patricia's hands came free. Lena ripped the tape from her mouth and whispered directly into her ear, "Get everyone to the supply closet. Stay low. Don't make a sound." Patricia nodded, terror overriding pride, and started passing the message down the line while Lena moved to cut the next set of restraints. The lead contractor was shouting orders over the gunfire. "Suppressing fire on the south windows. Get eyes on the shooters. Someone find the backup generator and—" An explosion rocked the building's east side. Not massive, not designed to bring down the structure, but enough to blow out the emergency room's side entrance and send equipment crashing. The contractors scattered into tactical positions, their attention divided between the external threat and maintaining control of the hostages they could no longer see in the darkness. Lena cut through Dr. Hess's restraints. He started to speak, and she clamped her hand over his mouth, shaking her head sharply. He got the message. She moved to the next nurse, then the next, working fast but methodically, her fingers finding zip ties in the dark with the kind of muscle memory that came from hundreds of field dressings applied under fire. Another explosion, this one closer. Shrapnel pinged off the walls. Someone screamed. One of the contractors went down, taken by a round that punched through the window he'd been using for cover. The others returned fire with automatic weapons that turned the darkness into lightning, spent brass raining on linoleum. "Fall back to secondary positions," the lead contractor shouted. "Abandon the—" He stopped mid-sentence as emergency lighting finally kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. The contractors could see again, see the hostages half-freed and crawling toward cover, see Lena Martinez standing in the middle of the ER bay with a scalpel in one hand and Dr. Hess's stolen phone in the other. The lead contractor's weapon swung toward her. "Don't move." Lena held up the phone so he could see the screen. "I already sent the message. Federal agents are inbound. You have maybe 5 minutes before this place is swarming with people who ask questions you can't answer with bullets." "You're bluffing, am I?" She tilted her head toward the gunfire still pouring in from outside. "That's not police. That's not SWAT. That's military. Probably the same people who extracted Marcus Carter from this ER 6 hours ago, who've been protecting him because someone very high up finally started asking the right questions about why their special operations soldiers keep dying." She took a step forward. "Your operation is blown. Your client is about to be exposed, and you're standing in the middle of a federal crime scene with 15 civilian witnesses and a body count that's going to end with all of you in supermax or dead." The contractor's eyes flicked to his men, calculating odds, processing variables. Professional killers knew when a situation had turned terminal. The question was whether they'd cut losses and run or take everyone down with them. Lena made the decision for him. She threw the phone at the closest overhead light, shattering the bulb and plunging that section of the ER back into darkness. Then she moved. Not toward cover, toward the nearest contractor, the one who'd been guarding the hostages, whose attention was split between her and the external threat. She closed the distance in 3 running steps, the scalpel already in motion, finding the gap between his body armor panels just below the armpit. The blade sank deep. He dropped his rifle. She caught it before it hit the ground. Training took over. The rifle came up smooth and natural, stock to shoulder, finger on trigger, 3-round burst into the contractor closest to the hostages. He went down. The others were turning, realizing too late that the threat wasn't just outside anymore. Lena fired again, controlled bursts, prioritizing targets based on proximity to civilians. Another contractor dropped. Then another. The lead contractor returned fire and rounds sparked off the overturned crash cart she'd ducked behind, forcing her down. "Get them out!" she shouted to Patricia, who was frozen in place. "Move!" Patricia finally broke from her paralysis and started herding the freed hostages toward the supply closet. Dr. Hess was helping, his earlier cowardice replaced with something resembling courage, under pressure. They got 6 people clear before a contractor blocked their path, weapon raised. Diana Cho appeared from nowhere and hit him with a fire extinguisher. The impact didn't put him down, but it staggered him enough for one of the security guards, Mitchell Thompson, still bleeding from his earlier encounter with Marcus Carter, to tackle him from behind. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The external gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the chaos. Lena could hear breathing, whimpering, the wet gasping of a wounded contractor drowning in his own blood. She counted bodies in her head. 3 contractors down, 5 still active, 15 hostages. Way too many variables. The emergency lights flickered. Shadows jumped. The lead contractor's voice cut through the darkness, calm and professional despite everything falling apart around him. "Dr. Carter? Or should I call you Lieutenant Reyes? I'm going to make you an offer." Lena didn't respond. She was moving between positions, using the darkness and smoke for cover, trying to get an angle on his voice. "My employer doesn't care about these people. They care about the documentation Rodriguez stole. Give us the location and we walk away. Right now. No more shooting, no more casualties. Everyone lives." "Everyone except me, you mean? You're military. You understand acceptable losses." His voice was shifting position too, both of them circling like predators. "These civilians don't deserve to die for choices they didn't make, for secrets they don't know. Let them go. Trade yourself for them. That's what soldiers do, isn't it? Sacrifice for the greater good?" Lena's mind raced through the implications. He was stalling, waiting for backup or extraction or some other tactical advantage. But he was also right. The longer this went on, the more likely someone innocent would catch a stray round. Then she heard it. The distant sound of sirens, multiple sirens. Police, fire, ambulance, all converging on Mercy Heights Medical Center from every direction. The lead contractor heard it too. His voice hardened. Last chance. The location. Now. You want to know where Rodriguez hid the evidence? Lena stepped into the open, rifle lowered but ready, her voice carrying across the ER. He didn't hide it at all. He submitted it through official channels, filed a report with Military Criminal Investigation Division 3 weeks before his death, complete with documentation, photographs, testimony, everything. The contractor's expression didn't change. That's impossible. We would have known. We would have intercepted. You would have if he'd filed it through normal channels. But Rodriguez was smarter than that. He knew the system was compromised, so he bypassed it entirely. Sent everything to the one person whose job is holding generals accountable when they commit war crimes. Lena smiled without humor. He sent it to the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, registered mail, return receipt, 47 pages of documentation detailing illegal weapons procurement, unauthorized combat operations, and conspiracy to commit murder to cover it up. The contractor's weapon came up fast, but Lena was faster. Her rifle barked twice. He went down with center mass hits that punched through armor and dropped him permanently. The remaining contractors broke discipline. 2 ran for the exits. 1 turned his weapon on the hostages. Lena put him down before he could fire. The last one threw down his rifle and raised his hands, smart enough to know when the fight was lost. The ER doors burst open and tactical teams flooded in. Actual federal agents this time, FBI windbreakers, and Homeland Security badges, and enough firepower to start a small war. They swept the room with practiced efficiency, weapons tracking, voices shouting commands. Federal agents, hands where we can see them, down on the ground, now! Lena set down her rifle slowly and raised her hands. An agent grabbed her, forced her to the ground, zip-tied her wrists behind her back. She didn't resist. Just let it happen. Her face pressed against cold linoleum that still smelled like blood and antiseptic. Someone was shouting about casualties. Someone else was calling for paramedics. Patricia Kilgore was crying, hysterical relief mixing with shock. Dr. Hess was giving statements that nobody was listening to yet. The freed hostages were being escorted out, wrapped in blankets, stumbling like survivors of a bombing. Lena lay on the floor and waited while agents secured the scene and processed the bodies and tried to understand what had just turned a civilian hospital into a combat zone. Her wrists were already going numb from the zip ties. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the ground. Adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and the cold certainty that she'd just become the most complicated prisoner the federal government had processed in years. A pair of expensive shoes appeared in her limited field of vision. Then a hand reached down and cut her restraints with a pocket knife. She rolled over to see the general standing above her, flanked by 2 men in suits who had the particular brand of authority that came from Washington rather than field offices. "On your feet, Lieutenant," the general said quietly. Lena stood, rubbing feeling back into her wrists. Around them, federal agents were bagging evidence and photographing bodies and trying to establish a chain of command while local police secured the perimeter outside. The chaos was organized now, official. The kind of controlled disaster that came from too many agencies descending on one location simultaneously. One of the suited men spoke. "Lieutenant Elena Reyes, my name is Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. We need to have a very long conversation about what happened here tonight and what you know about Operation Copper Summit." Operation Copper Summit. Lena had never heard that designation, but she knew immediately what it meant. The classified mission that had killed her unit, the illegal weapons procurement that Rodriguez had documented, the conspiracy that had gotten 3 soldiers murdered and driven a 4th to psychotic breaks. "I'll tell you everything I know," she said. "On one condition." Webb's eyebrows rose. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I am, if you want testimony that will stand up in federal court. I want immunity for everyone who helped me tonight. Full immunity. No charges, no investigations, no consequences." She glanced at Patricia and Dr. Hess and Diana Cho and all the hospital staff who'd been caught in crossfire they didn't understand. They didn't ask to be part of this. They don't deserve to have their lives destroyed because I needed help." Webb and his partner exchanged glances. The general's expression was carefully neutral. "We'll see what we can do," Webb said finally. "In the meantime, you're coming with us for debriefing, voluntarily." "Of course," Lena looked at the general. "Marcus Carter, where is he?" "Walter Reed Medical Center, under psychiatric observation and federal protection. He's alive, stable, and he's been very cooperative now that he understands he's not being interrogated for information. He's being protected from the same people who killed his friends." "Did he have the documentation?" The general's slight smile answered before his words did. "Rodriguez gave him a safety deposit box key 3 weeks before the firebase incident. Told him if anything happened, wait 6 months, then open it. Carter opened it last week. Found everything. Procurement records, communication intercepts, photographs of shipping containers that officially don't exist, filled with weapons systems that officially were never developed." Lena felt something loosen in her chest. Relief. Vindication. The knowledge that Rodriguez's sacrifice hadn't been for nothing, that the truth was finally coming out. "Who gave the order? Who authorized the weapons procurement?" "That's still being investigated, but the trail leads high, very high." The general's voice dropped. "High enough that this is going to create shockwaves through DOD and the intelligence community for years. High enough that your testimony is going to be the difference between a quiet resignation and federal prison for some very powerful people." Webb cleared his throat. "This conversation needs to happen in a secure facility, not a crime scene. Lieutenant Reyes, if you'll come with us." They escorted her through the destroyed ER, past federal agents and local police and paramedics treating wounded contractors who'd survived to face trial. Past hospital staff who stared at her with expressions ranging from gratitude to fear to something that might have been respect. Past Patricia Kilgore, who looked at Lena like she was seeing her for the first time and didn't know what to make of what she saw. Diana Cho was waiting by the ambulance bay doors, still in her blood-stained scrubs, her face pale but composed. She caught Lena's arm as agents moved to guide her past. "Thank you," Diana said quietly, "for coming back, for protecting them even after how they treated you." Lena met her eyes. "That's what medics do. We protect people, even the ones who don't deserve it." She let the agents guide her outside into the cold night air. The parking lot was lit up like daylight. Police cruisers, federal vehicles, ambulances, news vans already setting up despite the perimeter. Lena could see reporters shouting questions that nobody was answering yet. They put her in the back of a black SUV, not restrained, not under arrest, but definitely not free to leave. The general climbed in beside her. Webb and his partner took the front seats. The vehicle pulled out of the hospital lot, escorted by 3 police cruisers and 2 more federal vehicles. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "Federal building downtown, secure interview rooms. You'll give a full statement, then we'll determine what happens next." Webb glanced back at her. "For what it's worth, your service record shows an exemplary career before the firebase incident. Commendations, combat medals. Your commanding officer wrote that you were one of the best medics he'd ever worked with. Before I died in a mission that never happened. Before you were forced to disappear to avoid being eliminated as a witness to crimes committed by people who should have been protecting you." Webb's voice was matter-of-fact. "We're going to fix that. Make it right. But it's going to take time and cooperation and testimony that some very powerful people are going to fight very hard to suppress." The SUV merged onto the highway, heading toward the downtown skyline. Lena watched the city pass by through tinted windows, processing everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. This morning, she'd been a rookie nurse being dismissed as too soft for emergency medicine. Tonight, she was a federal witness whose testimony would bring down a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and intelligence operations. "The contractors," she said, "the ones who survived. They'll have lawyers, they'll cut deals, they'll point fingers at whoever authorized the operation." "We're counting on it," Webb's partner said. He was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from Ivy League law degrees and federal prosecutor ambitions. "The more they turn on each other, the faster we build the case. And with Rodriguez's documentation as foundation, we have everything we need to prove conspiracy to commit murder, illegal weapons trafficking, and about 15 other federal charges." The general spoke up. "The question is who authorized it. Who signed off on Operation Copper Summit? Who gave the orders that turned a legitimate security mission into a black market weapons deal? And who ordered the contractors to eliminate witnesses when the operation was compromised? Lena added. Because that wasn't a battlefield decision. That was planned, coordinated. Someone gave the order to kill everyone who knew. Webb nodded. That's what we need to find out, and that's where your testimony becomes critical. You were there. You saw what happened. You can identify contractors, describe the weapons, establish timeline and chain of command. They pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a concrete and glass tower that screamed federal authority. Armed guards checked credentials. Barriers raised. They descended 3 levels into what looked like a bunker disguised as parking structure. The SUV stopped. Webb opened Lena's door. This way, please. They walked through corridors that smelled like recycled air and government budget, past offices where people worked late under fluorescent lights, into a secure wing where access required biometric scans and armed escorts. Finally, into an interview room that was surprisingly comfortable, actual chairs instead of metal stools, a conference table instead of interrogation setup, even a window showing a fake outdoor scene that almost looked real. Can I get you anything? Webb asked. Coffee, water, food? Lena realized she hadn't eaten since before her shift started. Hadn't slept. Hadn't stopped moving since Marcus Carter crashed through those ER doors and turned her careful cover into rubble. Coffee would be good. Webb's partner left and returned with 3 cups from what was apparently a surprisingly decent coffee maker somewhere in this facility. They sat around the conference table, federal agents on one side, a dead woman on the other, and the general who'd signed her death certificate sitting somewhere in between. Let's start at the beginning, Webb said, pulling out a recording device and setting it on the table. State your full name and rank for the record. Lena wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup and met his eyes. Lieutenant Elena Reyes, Special Operations Combat Medic, assigned to Joint Task Force 7, operating under classified authority in... She stopped. I need to know. How classified is this debrief? What am I allowed to say? Everything. Full operational details. The classification has been lifted for purposes of this investigation by order of the Secretary of Defense. Webb's voice was firm. Nothing you say in this room can be used to prosecute you for disclosure of classified information. You have complete immunity for testimony related to Operation Copper Summit and subsequent events. In writing? Webb slid a document across the table. Lena scanned it. Proper legal language, federal seal, signatures from people high enough in the food chain to make this stick. She signed at the bottom. Okay, she said. You want the beginning. Here it is. She talked for 3 hours straight. Described the fire base in the mountains, the mission briefing that didn't make sense, the contractors who outnumbered military personnel 3-1, the locked shipping containers, Rodriguez intercepting communications, the sudden outbreak of violence when questions got too pointed, the firefight that killed most of her unit, the escape through enemy territory, the official report that called it a terrorist attack and listed her among the dead. Webb and his partner took notes, asked clarifying questions, recorded every detail. The general sat silent, his face carefully neutral, listening to the mission he'd authorized described from the perspective of someone who'd survived it. The contractors, Webb said. You mentioned they were from Aegis Strategic Solutions. Can you identify any of them specifically? I can identify 12 by face. I have names for 8 of them from their radio communications, and I can identify the team leader absolutely. Lena pulled up the memory. His name was Vincent Krause, former Navy SEAL. He was running the security detail, and he was the one who gave the order to open fire when Rodriguez tried to report what he'd found. Webb and his partner exchanged significant glances. What? Lena asked. Vincent Krause was killed 3 months ago in a car accident. Single vehicle collision, ruled driver error. The room went cold. Lena's mind made the connection instantly. Someone's been cleaning up their own people, not just military witnesses, anyone who could testify. It appears that way. We've identified 7 contractors from Aegis Strategic Solutions who worked Operation Copper Summit. 4 are dead, accidents, suicides, 1 unsolved homicide. The remaining 3 have disappeared. Webb's voice was grim. Someone is eliminating everyone with direct knowledge. Military, contractors, support personnel. Anyone who could connect the weapons procurement to whoever authorized it. Which means whoever's behind this has reached beyond Aegis. They're coordinating across multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions. The general's voice was quiet, but hard. That requires serious power. Secretary-level access minimum, possibly higher. Lena set down her coffee cup. You said the trail leads high. How high are we talking? Webb hesitated, then made a decision. I'm going to show you something that doesn't leave this room. He pulled out a tablet and brought up a file. This is what Rodriguez documented, what Marcus Carter handed over last week. The screen showed procurement orders for weapon systems Lena didn't recognize, advanced targeting packages, experimental munitions, guidance systems that looked like they belonged in science fiction, millions of dollars worth of equipment purchased through shell companies and routed through the firebase for delivery to unknown recipients. Who were the buyers, she asked. We're still tracking that, but the authorization signatures. Webb swiped to another document. Lena saw names she recognized, senior military officials, deputy directors, people whose careers spanned decades and whose authority touched every level of defense operations. And at the bottom of one procurement order, a signature that made her blood run cold. That's the Deputy Secretary of Defense, she said quietly. That's the second highest civilian position in the entire Department of Defense. Was, the general corrected. He resigned 2 days ago, citing health reasons. Left the country yesterday for an extended stay in a non-extradition nation. So he runs. He gets away. Not necessarily. Webb closed the file. We've frozen his assets, revoked his passport, put him on every international watch list that exists, and we're building a case that includes testimony from you, from Marcus Carter, from the forensic evidence Rodriguez collected. He leaned forward. But here's the problem. A case this big, against someone that powerful, with implications that reach this deep into military and intelligence operations, it can't just be about evidence. It needs to be ironclad, unquestionable. The kind of case that survives political pressure and media scrutiny and every expensive lawyer money can buy. You need me to testify publicly, Lena said, not just in federal court, in congressional hearings, media interviews, the full exposure treatment. Eventually, yes. Not immediately. First, we need to ensure your safety, establish protective custody, prepare you for what that kind of scrutiny involves. Webb's expression was sympathetic. I'm not going to lie to you, Lieutenant. Going public means the end of any privacy. It means every detail of your life becoming fodder for cable news. It means threats, harassment, people questioning your credibility and your motives. It means becoming the face of one of the biggest military scandals in decades. Lena thought about the last 2 years. Hiding, running, pretending to be someone small and forgettable and weak, never fighting back, never speaking up, never being anything except invisible. She was done being invisible. When do we start? She asked. The look of relief on Webb's face told her everything she needed to know about how important her cooperation was. We'll begin detailed depositions tomorrow. For now, we have a secure facility where you can rest, clean up, get proper food, and sleep. Federal protection around the clock until we determine the full scope of the threat. What about the hospital staff? Diana Cho, Patricia Kilgore, the others. Are they safe? We have agents interviewing them now. They'll be offered protective custody if they want it, though preliminary assessment suggests they were incidental to the operation. Leverage, not targets. Webb stood. You saved their lives tonight, Lieutenant. All of them. That matters. It matters more that we finish this, Lena said, that everyone who gave orders to kill American soldiers faces consequences, that Rodriguez and Chen and Williams didn't die for nothing. The general spoke for the first time in an hour. They didn't. Because of you. Because you survived when you should have died. Because you stayed alive long enough to testify. He met her eyes. I meant what I said at the hospital. I'm sorry. For every choice I made that put you in danger. For signing papers that erased you. For not asking harder questions when soldiers started dying. Save the apology, Lena said, but her voice was softer than before. Just help me make sure this matters, that we burn down everyone responsible and rebuild something better from the ashes. Webb gestured toward the door. Come on, let's get you secured for the night. Tomorrow starts the real work. They walked back through the secure corridors, past offices that were finally emptying as midnight approached. The building felt different now, less like a prison, more like a fortress. Protection instead of confinement. An agent was waiting by the elevator with a tablet. He showed it to Webb, who read the screen and went very still. "What?" Lena asked. Webb looked at her, his expression carefully controlled. "We just arrested the former Deputy Secretary of Defense at Dulles International trying to board a private flight to Dubai. Apparently our travel restrictions worked faster than he anticipated." Lena felt something fierce and satisfied settle in her chest. "Good. That's not all." Webb's voice was strange now. "He's already talking, offering full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Says he can provide evidence of a broader conspiracy involving illegal weapons sales to foreign nationals, systematic elimination of witnesses, and corruption reaching into congressional oversight committees." The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. The doors closed and they descended toward whatever came next. "How broad are we talking?" the general asked quietly. "Broad enough that the Attorney General just called an emergency meeting with the Director of the FBI and the Secretary of Defense." Webb's phone was buzzing constantly now. "Broad enough that this is going to be the lead story on every news network by sunrise. Broad enough that—" The elevator lurched to a stop. Emergency lights came on. An alarm began wailing somewhere in the building. Webb's hand went to his weapon. The general pushed Lena behind him. The other agent was already on his radio, his voice clipped and urgent. "Control! This is Webb. What's our status?" Static. Then a voice, distorted and breaking up. "Breach on sublevel 2. Multiple hostiles. Fall back to—" The transmission cut off. Gunfire echoed through the elevator shaft from somewhere below. Close. Getting closer. Webb looked at Lena, and in his eyes she saw the terrible understanding that this wasn't over. That whoever had sent contractors to kill her at the hospital, whoever had eliminated Rodriguez and Chen and Williams, whoever had just seen their entire conspiracy start to unravel with the Deputy Secretary's arrest, they just sent one final cleanup team to make sure the most important witness never made it to testify. The elevator doors were starting to open manually, someone below prying them apart with tools or explosives, or sheer determination. And Lena Martinez, Lieutenant Elena Reyes, was trapped in a metal box with nowhere to run, and a federal agent's pistol the only thing between her and the people who'd already tried to kill her twice tonight. The elevator doors were being pried open with methodical precision, metal groaning against metal, emergency lights casting everything in sharp relief. Webb's pistol came up smooth and fast, trained on the widening gap. The general moved to shield Lena with his body, an instinct born from decades of command, still trying to protect soldiers even when he was unarmed and outmatched. Lena pushed past both of them. "Get back," Webb hissed. She ignored him. Her hand shot through the partially open doors and grabbed the crowbar being used to pry them apart. One sharp yank and she had the leverage she needed, pulled hard, throwing whoever was on the other side off balance. The doors jerked open fully, and Lena came through low and fast, using the element of surprise before training could compensate. Except it wasn't a contractor in tactical gear on the other side. It was a federal agent, wide-eyed and bleeding from a shoulder wound, his service weapon already raised. He nearly shot her before recognition kicked in, and he lowered the pistol with shaking hands. "They're in the building," he gasped. "Hit the security checkpoint on sublevel 2. 4 hostiles, maybe 5. They're coming up." Webb grabbed the wounded agent and pulled him into the elevator. "How many casualties?" 3 agents down, maybe more. I lost visual when they breached the stairwell." The agent's face was pale, shock setting in. They knew exactly where to hit, exactly when guards would be rotating. This wasn't random. This was planned. The general was already moving, pulling the fire alarm to trigger building-wide evacuation protocols. Sirens wailed. Overhead sprinklers activated, drenching everything in cold water. Emergency procedures that would clear civilians and bring every available response unit converging on this location. But response took time, and the hostiles were already inside. Lena's mind calculated the tactical situation with the cold precision that had kept her alive in worse circumstances. They were trapped between an active threat below and limited exit routes above. The building's secure wing would have redundant safety measures, blast doors, reinforced walls, multiple defensive positions. But those same measures that kept threats out could trap them inside. "The secure interview rooms," she said. They're designed to be defensible. Reinforced doors, panic buttons, probably direct line to federal response teams. Webb nodded sharply. Third floor, east wing, but we have to cross 2 exposed hallways to get there. Then we move fast, and we move smart. Lena looked at the wounded agent. Can you walk? He nodded, pressing his hand against the shoulder wound. I can run if I have to. They left the elevator and entered a stairwell that echoed with distant gunfire and shouting. The building was evacuating in controlled chaos, agents securing sensitive materials, support staff fleeing toward designated exits, armed response teams mobilizing toward the breach point. Nobody stopped them. Everyone was too focused on their own survival protocols. They climbed 2 flights of stairs before they heard boots pounding from below. Multiple hostiles, moving fast, closing distance. Webb positioned himself at the stairwell door, weapon ready, covering their escape while Lena and the general helped the wounded agent keep pace. Go, Webb shouted. I'll hold them. Like hell, Lena said, and grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount. She pulled the pin, aimed down the stairwell, and unleashed a cloud of chemical retardant that turned the narrow space into zero-visibility hell. Shouts of confusion echoed up. Someone fired blind and rounds sparked off concrete. They burst through the stairwell door onto the 3rd floor and ran. The hallway stretched ahead, lit by emergency lighting and sprinkler systems that turned everything into a nightmarish waterscape. Doors to offices stood open, abandoned in the evacuation. Somewhere an alarm was still wailing. The secure wing entrance was ahead, reinforced door with biometric scanner, the kind of barrier designed to keep unauthorized personnel out. Webb swiped his badge. The scanner blinked red. Denied. He tried again. Still red. They've locked down the system, he said, already pulling out his phone to override. Security protocol in breach situations. I need command authorization to... The stairwell door behind them exploded open. 2 figures in tactical gear came through firing, muzzle flashes strobing in the emergency lights. Rounds punched into walls, glass shattered. The wounded agent went down with a cry. Lena moved on pure combat instinct. She grabbed the fallen agent's weapon and returned fire, controlled pairs that forced the hostiles into cover while Webb worked the override and the general dragged the wounded man toward relative safety behind an overturned desk. The scanner blinked green. The reinforced door unlocked with a heavy mechanical thunk. Inside, now! Webb shouted. They piled through the doorway as rounds hammered the frame. The door sealed behind them with the finality of a vault closing. The sudden silence was deafening. They were in a secure corridor lined with interview rooms and evidence storage, designed to be the last line of defense if the building was ever breached. Blast doors, reinforced walls, independent power and communications. A fortress within a fortress. Webb was already on a hardline phone calling for backup with the kind of clipped urgency that got immediate response. The general was applying pressure to the wounded agent's shoulder, his hand steady despite the chaos. Lena stood with the pistol trained on the door, waiting for it to breach, knowing it would hold but unable to shake the feeling that walls only delayed the inevitable. Federal response is 2 minutes out, Webb said, hanging up. SWAT, FBI Tactical, U.S. Marshals, they're coming in heavy. 2 minutes is a long time when people are trying to kill you, Lena said. As if on cue, something impacted the reinforced door with massive force. Not gunfire. Something bigger. Shaped charge, maybe, or a breaching ram. The door held, but the impact shook the entire corridor. They're not giving up, the general said quietly. Whoever sent them is willing to lose everything, the element of surprise, operational security, even their own people just to make sure you don't testify. Another impact. The door was holding but showing stress fractures around the frame. Lena's mind raced through possibilities. They could hold this position, wait for federal response, let overwhelming force resolve the situation. Safe, smart, by the book. But the people on the other side of that door weren't following any book. They were burning their last bridges, spending their last assets, making their final play. And desperate people with nothing left to lose were the most dangerous kind. I have an idea, she said. But you're not going to like it. Webb looked at her. I already don't like it. There's a reason they're throwing everything at this breach. They need me dead before I can testify, before I can identify people, before I can connect dots that destroy careers and end with prison sentences. Lena met his eyes. So let's give them what they want. Absolutely not. We're not using you as bait. I'm not asking permission. She moved toward one of the interview rooms, already formulating the plan. How many exits does this secure wing have? 3. Main entrance we just came through, emergency exit on the north side, and a service elevator that goes directly to the parking garage. Can you lock down the north exit and the elevator? Make this corridor a kill box with only one way in or out? The general understood immediately. You want to funnel them into a controlled engagement. Force them to come through that door where we have defensive advantage. More than that, I want them to think they've won, that they've breached, that resistance has collapsed, that all they have to do is finish the job. Lena's voice was cold and tactical. Let them commit. Let them think they've succeeded. And then we close the trap. Webb was shaking his head. If the door fails before federal response arrives, then we make our stand right here. But if my plan works, we take them alive. We get them talking. We identify who sent them and who gave the orders, and we build a case that doesn't rely on just my testimony. She looked at the wounded agent, at the general, at Webb. This is the only way to end this tonight. Otherwise, we're just delaying until they try again. Another massive impact. The door was buckling now, the frame giving way. 30 seconds, maybe a minute, before it failed completely. Webb made his decision. Do it. I'll coordinate with tactical response. But if this goes wrong, it won't, Lena said with more confidence than she felt. She moved into one of the interview rooms and positioned herself where she'd be visible through the reinforced window, but protected by the angle of the door frame. Made herself look small, unarmed, defeated. The rookie nurse again. The soft target. Exactly what they'd been expecting to find. The general and Webb took positions in adjoining rooms with clear firing lines on the corridor. The wounded agent was secured in evidence storage with a spare weapon and instructions to defend himself if everything went sideways. The corridor went quiet except for the distant wail of sirens and the sound of the door finally giving way under one last massive impact. The breach was textbook professional, flashbang first, then 4 hostiles in tactical formation sweeping the corridor with weapons up and ready. They moved like a trained unit, covering angles, communicating with hand signals, executing the kind of breach protocols that came from military or high-end security backgrounds. They saw Lena through the window, saw her alone, apparently unarmed, pressed against the far wall like a cornered civilian. Their formation shifted, 2 moving to secure the room while the others held the corridor. The lead hostile entered first, weapon tracking, finger on trigger. His eyes found Lena and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or satisfaction. Mission accomplished. Target acquired. He never saw Webb step from the adjoining room with his pistol raised. Federal agent, drop your weapons. Hands where I can see them. The hostile spun, weapon coming up fast, and Webb fired twice. Center mass. The hostile went down. The corridor erupted into chaos. The remaining hostiles returned fire, muzzle flashes strobing in the confined space. Webb took cover. The general emerged from his position and engaged with a weapon he'd taken from the fallen hostile, his shots precise despite years behind a desk. Lena wasn't unarmed anymore. She'd palmed a collapsible baton from her waistband, taken from the wounded agent when she'd helped him into cover, and she came out of the interview room fast and low while the hostiles were focused on the gunfire. She hit the nearest one from behind, the baton extending with a metallic snap and connecting with the back of his knee. He went down hard. She transitioned to his weapon arm, hyperextending the elbow with brutal efficiency, forcing him to drop his rifle. A strike to the temple put him unconscious. 2 hostiles left. They were falling back toward the breached door, still firing, realizing too late that they'd walked into a kill box. Federal tactical teams were storming the building. Sirens were everywhere. Their extraction was blown and their mission was failed, and all that was left was survival. One of them threw down his weapon and raised his hands. The other tried to run and took a round from Webb that dropped him permanently. The gunfire stopped. The corridor filled with the smell of cordite and blood. Emergency lights painted everything in harsh red. The wounded hostile on the ground was moaning. The one who'd surrendered was face down with his hands behind his head, smart enough to know when the fight was lost. Webb was already moving, zip-tying the survivors, checking vitals, securing weapons. The general stood with his borrowed pistol still raised, his expression carved from stone. Lena stood over the hostile she'd taken down, breathing hard, adrenaline still singing through her veins. Federal tactical teams flooded the corridor seconds later, too late to help, just in time to secure the scene. They swept through with practiced efficiency, calling clear rooms, processing casualties, establishing control. An agent in SWAT gear approached Webb. "We have the building secured. 4 hostiles neutralized total, 2 in custody. No additional threats detected. Casualties on our side? 5 agents wounded, none critical, 3 civilian support staff injured during evacuation. Could have been a lot worse." Could have been, should have been, would have been if Lena had run instead of fought, if she'd chosen survival over testimony, if she'd stayed dead instead of coming back to finish what Rodriguez started. Webb turned to her, his expression somewhere between respect and disbelief. "You just took down an armed hostile with a baton." "I had good training," Lena said simply. "Clearly." They were escorted to a different secure location, a federal safe house across the city, unmarked and anonymous, the kind of place that didn't exist on any official records. Medical personnel treated the wounded. Debriefing teams took initial statements. And through it all, Lena sat in a quiet room and watched the sun rise through bulletproof glass, marking the end of the longest night of her life. Webb found her an hour after dawn with coffee and the kind of exhaustion that came from running on adrenaline and duty for too many hours straight. "The hostiles are talking," he said, sitting down across from her. "Both of them. They were hired by a shell company that traces back to Aegis Strategic Solutions. And that company has connections to the deputy secretary and 2 other senior DoD officials who are currently being arrested as we speak." "How many people are going down for this?" "Dozens, maybe more. The conspiracy reaches into military procurement, intelligence operations, congressional oversight committees. It's going to take months to untangle all the threads." Webb took a sip of coffee. "But the foundation of the case is your testimony. What you witnessed. What you survived. What you can prove." Lena nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Soon, but first there's someone who wants to talk to you." He led her to another room where Marcus Carter sat in a wheelchair, looking smaller than his 7-foot frame suggested. His eyes clearer than they'd been at the hospital, but still haunted by things he couldn't forget. A nurse, a real one, military medical corps, stood nearby monitoring vitals. Marcus looked up when Lena entered. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been hope. "Ghost," he said quietly. "Rodriguez said you were dead." "I was. For a while." Lena sat down across from him. "But death didn't take. Apparently I'm too stubborn." A ghost of a smile touched his face. "He said that too. Said if anyone could survive hell, it would be you." The smile faded. "He gave me something. Before the firebase. Said if anything happened, wait 6 months and then open the safety deposit box. I didn't understand why. Thought maybe he was just being paranoid. He was being smart. He knew what we were guarding, knew what would happen when people started asking questions. The documentation, the evidence. I turned it all over to the investigators." Marcus's hands were shaking slightly. "But it didn't bring him back. Didn't bring any of them back. Chen, Williams, the others. They're still dead, and I'm still—" His voice broke. Lena reached across and took his hand. The gesture would have been unthinkable for the invisible nurse she'd pretended to be. But she wasn't that person anymore. Maybe she never had been. "They're dead because people with power made choices that valued profit over lives," she said quietly. "But their deaths aren't meaningless. The evidence Rodriguez collected, the testimony we're going to give, the trials that are coming, that's how we make sure their sacrifice matters. That's how we make sure it never happens again." Marcus met her eyes. "Will it work? Will any of this actually change anything?" "I don't know, but I know we have to try. Because if we don't, if we just stay silent and let the powerful bury the truth, then they win. And I'm done letting them win." He nodded slowly. "Rodriguez would have liked that. He always said you had more fight in you than anyone gave you credit for. He was right. They sat in silence for a moment, two survivors holding on to each other across the wreckage of everything they'd lost, finding something like strength in shared trauma and the knowledge that they weren't alone anymore. The trials took 6 months to prepare. Federal prosecutors built cases against 14 senior officials, 23 military officers, and 37 contractors and civilian accomplices. The charges ranged from illegal weapons trafficking to conspiracy to commit murder to obstruction of justice. The media called it the biggest military corruption scandal in decades. Lena testified for 11 days across multiple proceedings. She sat in federal courtrooms and congressional hearing rooms and media interview studios, telling the same story over and over: the firebase, the containers, the contractors who turned, the soldiers who died. She identified faces and described events and connected dots that turned abstract conspiracy into concrete criminal conduct. Defense attorneys attacked her credibility. Media pundits questioned her motives. Anonymous online accounts called her a liar and a traitor, and worse. She endured it all with the same calm competence she'd shown it in the ER, never breaking, never backing down, never letting them see anything except absolute certainty. Patricia Kilgore reached out 3 months into the trials. A simple email: "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry." Lena responded with 2 words: apology accepted. They never spoke again, but it was enough. Diana Cho stayed in touch, calling weekly to check in, offering friendship that Lena slowly learned to accept. They had coffee sometimes, talked about everything except the night that had changed both their lives, built something like normal in the spaces between trauma. The verdicts came down in waves. The deputy secretary got 25 years in federal prison. The senior officials got sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. The contractors who survived faced murder charges, conspiracy charges, weapons trafficking charges. Aegis Strategic Solutions was dissolved, its assets seized, its leadership facing decades behind bars. Rodriguez's widow attended every day of testimony, sitting in the gallery with his commendations pinned to her jacket. When the final verdict was read, she found Lena outside the courthouse and hugged her for a long time without speaking. Some things didn't need words. Marcus Carter was medically retired with full benefits and comprehensive psychiatric care. He moved to a small town in Montana where the mountains reminded him of the firebase, but the silence was peaceful instead of threatening. He called Lena sometimes, late at night, when the memories got too loud. She always answered. The general resigned his commission 3 weeks after the final trial concluded. No scandal, no charges, just a quiet retirement announcement and a pension he'd earned through decades of service. He sent Lena a letter on official stationery. "You were a better soldier than I was a commander. Thank you for having the courage I lacked." She kept it in a drawer and never responded. A year after the trials ended, Lena stood in front of Mercy Heights Medical Center and looked up at the building that had been both her refuge and her prison. The ER had been rebuilt, the broken glass replaced, the destruction erased. Like it had never happened. She'd been invited back. Official ceremony, full reinstatement, apologies from hospital administration, and recognition for her service. They wanted to give her a medal, make a speech, turn her into a symbol of courage under fire. She'd declined. Some wounds didn't heal with ceremonies, and some bridges were better left burned. But she'd come anyway. Not for them. For herself. Diana Cho was waiting in the parking lot, still in her scrubs from a shift that had apparently been blessedly routine. She smiled when she saw Lena approach. "You came," Diana said. "I did, though I'm still not going to that ceremony." "I know, but I thought maybe you'd want to see something else." Diana led her around to the side of the building, to a memorial garden that hadn't existed before. Small, quiet, tucked away where most people wouldn't notice. 3 benches, 3 plaques: Rodriguez, Chen, Williams. And a 4th bench with no plaque, just empty space waiting to be filled with names of veterans who'd survived war but lost the fight when they came home. "The hospital board approved it last month," Diana said quietly. "Dedicated to soldiers who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. I thought you should know it exists." Lena sat on Rodriguez's bench and let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in 2 years. Grief. Loss. The weight of survival when so many others hadn't. He'd hate this, she said finally. Rodriguez. He'd say it was sentimental bullshit and we should spend the money on actual veteran services instead of plaques. Probably. But he'd also be glad you're still alive to complain about it. Yeah, he would. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the city, two women who'd survived hell and chosen to keep fighting instead of breaking. The emergency room doors opened and closed behind them, an endless rhythm of crisis and recovery that never stopped. What are you going to do now? Diana asked. Now that the trials are over and the story's been told. Lena had thought about that question for months. She wasn't Lena Martinez anymore. That identity was blown, unusable, tied to too much media coverage. And she couldn't be Lieutenant Elena Reyes either. That person had died in a firebase and been resurrected for testimony, but didn't fit the world that came after. I'm going back to school, she said. Psychiatry specialization, focus on combat trauma and veteran mental health. Diana's eyebrows rose. From combat medic to nurse to psychiatrist. That's a journey. But someone needs to help the Marcus Carters of the world. Someone who understands what it's like to survive hell and come back broken. Someone who knows that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about putting yourself back together and choosing to keep going. Lena stood. Rodriguez used to say the fight doesn't end when the war's over. It just changes shape. This is how I keep fighting. He'd be proud of you. Maybe. Or maybe he'd tell me I'm still too stubborn for my own good and should learn to take a vacation. Lena smiled, genuine and real for the first time in longer than she could remember. But I learned from the best, from soldiers who refused to stay silent even when silence was safer, from nurses who helped when they didn't have to, from people who chose justice over comfort. She walked toward her car, a new one, registered under a new name, part of a new life she was building from the ashes of everything that had burned. Diana walked with her, two women who'd faced down killers and testified against power and survived with their integrity intact. Will I see you again? Diana asked. Probably. The world's smaller than it used to be, and I'm done hiding. They hugged, quick and fierce, then separated. Lena got in her car and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Mercy Heights Medical Center behind for the last time. In her rearview mirror, the hospital grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. She drove toward the setting sun, toward a future that was uncertain, but finally completely her own. No more hiding, no more pretending to be weak when she was strong. No more letting people underestimate her because it was safer than being seen. She was done being invisible. She was done being a ghost. She was exactly who she'd always been. A combat medic who saved lives, a soldier who fought for justice, a survivor who refused to let trauma define her. The woman everyone had dismissed and underestimated and written off as too soft for emergency medicine. The woman who'd proven them all wrong. And somewhere, in whatever came after, Rodriguez and Chen and Williams were watching and smiling, knowing that their deaths had meant something, that their sacrifice had bought justice, that the fight they'd started had been finished by the one person stubborn enough to survive and strong enough to win. Lena Martinez, Elena Reyes, whoever she became next, drove into the sunset with the windows down and the radio up, free and vindicated and finally at peace with the ghost that would always walk beside her. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of possibility. She pressed the accelerator and drove faster, leaving the past behind and racing toward whatever came next. Undefeated, unbroken, undeniably, completely alive.